Cool. Okay. Okay. Cool. Hello, everyone. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time tuning in, we're here streaming every Tuesday and Thursday at 6:30 p.m. PST and Wednesdays at 6 p.m. PST. Today we're doing a Chinese noodle dish called Zha Jiang Mian. Zha Jiang Mian, if you are familiar, is one of those dishes that come up in a whole bunch of different Asian cuisines across many different ethnicities, as far as I can tell, because it is a really fundamental and kind of a basic noodle dish, which is why it is one of my favorites, because I've been eating it since I was a little kid. The version that we're making today is the Chinese version, but I have definitely had a Korean version called Zha Jiang Mian. I've also had a Japanese version that is made with ramen noodles. I believe, had a Thai version, I think, that's done with rice noodles. All sorts of different kinds of Zha Jiang Mian. It is one of those dishes that transcends across a number of different cultures. I would also say that it is very similar to a Italian bolognese, which is essentially a noodle meat sauce. So one of those dishes that's because it is so fundamental and basic, it crosses across different cultures very easily. So we're going to take a look at a couple of different things that make this particular version a Chinese Zha Jiang Mian. Namely in the use of black bean sauce. So we're going to be using black bean paste, which is very fermented and like very heavy in umami. And we're going to be taking a look at like what about that ingredient makes it so iconic to the Chinese version of Zha Jiang Mian. So if you have any questions for me, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. I don't know everything about Zha Jiang Mian or like Beijing street noodles or anything really, but I know lots of stuff, so hopefully I can be helpful or informative, or at the very least entertaining to watch. So, if this is your first time catching one of these streams, almost everything that I cook on stream, it has a recipe video that goes along with it. Those recipe videos, they always live over on my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/woocancook. If you're watching on Reddit, that would be the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen. If you're watching on YouTube, it's the YouTube channel you're already on. Over there, there's a whole bunch of fun recipes and videos and stuff like that. Usually in those recipe videos, I move a little bit slower and we take a little bit more time to talk through some of like the decision making that goes behind why I do certain things in some recipes, why I leave some things out, stuff like that. All of which it comes up in a lot of those recipe videos. So if you're interested in learning more about the thing that I'm cooking and maybe taking a shot at it yourself, you can definitely hop over and check out what's going on over there. In addition to all of the recipe videos, that's also where the live stream schedule lives. So if you're looking for to find out what I'm going to be cooking next, you can find that over on YouTube. That live stream schedule usually goes out about 2 or 3 weeks now. So if you are watching on YouTube, you would have known a couple of weeks ago that I'd be doing this on stream because it's all posted over there. So if you're interested in stuff like that, I recommend hopping over to YouTube, checking out what's going on over there. As with a number of Chinese, at least savory Chinese dishes, I'm starting off by crushing and mincing some garlic, followed by some finely minced ginger. So I like to use 4 cloves of garlic, but if you like garlic, add more. Then this ginger is about 1 inch or maybe about a tablespoon's worth of ginger. And the reason that we start out with these 2 ingredients so often, pretty much I would say like 90 to 95% of everything that I cook in a wok, is because they work really well as the fundamental building block of all Chinese food, or at the very least Chinese food, I would say, even across many different types of Asian foods. So really, anytime that we're working on building out layers of umami, very often you will find that these 2 elements, they go into the wok first, and then we start building other layers of umami on top of it. So that is why if you ever watched these streams before, almost every stream it starts with the exactly same 2 ingredients, which is usually ginger and garlic. Chicken adobo, yeah, I've touched on it a little bit. It's kind of hard to make. It's one of those things that I've been looking into. But it's also one of those things that's like pretty complicated, and also like very often it's one of those like close guarded family secrets. So like the adobo sauce is very tricky. I guess it's like it would be really easy if I just used like canned adobo sauce. But the adobo sauce is really, really tricky to master. So one of those things I'll probably add it to the list, but it's probably going to take a while to figure that one out. Usually when I venture outside of Chinese cuisine, it gets a little bit tricky, and I believe adobo comes from Filipino cuisine. So I'll probably have to consult some Filipinos. Alright, so next up, we're moving along with our other veggies. So the only other veggie? Yeah, the only other veggie that we're adding today is some carrots. These are going to be used as a garnish. I believe in the original recipe video I used both carrots and a cucumber as a garnish. You can also do that if you want to. I think the only reason that I'm not really doing it today is because I really don't feel like cutting a cucumber today. That's really it. But if you're committed to it, they work really, really well as 2 parallel garnishes. So in order for them to work as garnishes though, we need to julienne them. So we're going to do a Julian cut, and that is because we want our garnishes to be a pretty similar shape and size as our noodles. So in order to make sure that they kind of fit into the same shape and size as our noodles, so that we have a pretty consistent bite with our Zha Jiang Mian, we are going to cut these into a Julian cut. So when I've been lazy, I have also cut these. I just stopped at planks, which is essentially 1 step short of what a Julian cut is. So if I were doing planks, that would basically be a plank. So now we have long, thick, and wide layers of carrot. If we're going for Julian, what we're essentially doing is doing a plank and then slicing them thinner. Balancing sweet, sour, and salty is a tough one. And tangy, yeah. As good sauteed mushroom recipes. Ooh. I have a bunch of recipes that use mushrooms in it. None of them are really the highlights. I think my favorite one that really highlights, I guess like the one that highlights mushrooms the most would be the Honcho Tofu recipe, which is also over on the YouTube channel. And it is essentially a deep fried and braised tofu in a thick mushroom sauce. So it very, very prominently features the use of shiitake mushrooms. So that's probably one of my favorites. And is also, I believe, I'm pretty sure it is vegetarian. I don't remember what I added to the sauce, but I'm pretty sure it is vegetarian. If it's not vegetarian, it's something that you can make vegetarian very easily, which is one of my favorite dishes to recommend when people ask about vegetarian stuff too. You have way too many shrooms in your house. Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's never the end of the world, especially if they're dried mushrooms. I have a lot of shiitake mushrooms, and you could shiitake mushrooms, they stay forever, so you could keep those in the house forever. The mushroom shop that I buy my shiitake mushrooms at sell them in, I think they look like 50-pound bags of shiitake mushrooms, which is an insane amount of shiitake mushrooms. I'm pretty sure it's because they sell that stuff to restaurants, but the only smaller quantity of mushroom that I can get from them is like 10 pounds. So I have a crazy amount of shiitake mushrooms in the house at all times. Which is okay though, because since they're dried mushrooms, they have a very, very, very long shelf life. Yeah, the basic recipe, let me look that up. There it is. There you go, Tim. So that's the Honcho Tofu recipe that we did. That was, I think, maybe back in October or so. And it's really, really tasty. It's also, if you are not familiar with deep frying, so lots of people are worried about deep frying. Honcho Tofu, it absolutely does not require that you deep fry it. In my version, I did do a deep fry. But you can also absolutely just skip the deep fry. or maybe you can even pan sear instead of deep fry, or just skip it entirely and then just throw in cubed tofu. And it's all of which are common substitutions in Honcho Tofu. I would even say I think the most common version of Honcho Tofu, it doesn't use deep frying. It just uses a braise. Alright, so we're almost done with these carrots. If you're keeping track, the Julian cut is probably the most time-consuming and physically laborious cut that I know of, at least, because it requires that we cut it in so many different directions. So I say like the best shortcut to a Julian cut, I don't really think there's any real shortcut to a Julian cut other than just getting really good at them. But the best one that I've found is starting with planks, like so, and then we're going to stack them on top of each other, line them up with our knife, and then cut downward from there and on top of each other, and then we have a Julian cut. So if you do it correctly, you really shouldn't have to cut it that many times. Very often I mess up my Julian cuts because it's a really difficult job to master. Which is also why very often I give up and I just do planks instead. Alright, so we're setting these carrots aside. These are going to be our garnish later on. Since they're a garnish, you want to remember that these are going to be essentially the only thing in this entire dish that is not going to be cooked, which means that if you have a dish or if you have an ingredient that is not going to be cooked, you want to treat them pretty differently from everything else, specifically with their relation to meat. So you want to keep these physically far apart from everything else that involves raw meat. So namely today that is going to be bacon and ground turkey. So anytime that you're working with a garnish, really any ingredient that's not going to go into your wok fry, make sure that you treat that, take food safety or cross-contamination pretty seriously there. All right, let's do this. Cool. Let's see. Next up, before we forget, I'm going to rehydrate some shiitake mushrooms here. We're going to be dicing these, so we don't need them we don't need to use too many shiitake mushrooms. So in past recipes, I've used like 6 to 8 of these things because I love shiitake mushrooms. Oh, is this sound bad? Let's see. Yeah, if the sound is bad, feel free to let me know. That happens all the time. It's because of this stupid mic pack. Doop-a-doop-a-doop. Check, check. Is this better? Hopefully this is better. Check, check. Is this better? Hopefully this is better. Cool. I think that's better. Let me know if the sound goes out again. That happens literally all the time because the mic pack is a piece of junk. Alright, so for our shiitake mushrooms, I'm going to go with 4 shiitake mushrooms here. That's not a whole lot of mushrooms, but essentially what we're going to be doing is dicing these up and then throwing them in towards the end. And that is because we're going to be deriving quite a bit of umami from these. So since we're not going to be using these in very large quantities. Something's rubbing against it. Yeah, I think I fixed that. So since we're not going to be using these in like very large physical quantities, they're not going to have a huge amount of like physical presence in our Zha Jiang Mian. So we don't need to use a lot of them. Really what we're trying to do is derive some umami from these. So if you're vegetarian, if you've ever found like vegetarian substitutes for a number of different sauces that come up in Asian foods, so things like fish sauce, oyster sauce, even I think fish sauce and oyster sauce are probably the two big ones. What they use in order to recreate that umami quality that comes in those things without using fish in them is it's shiitake mushrooms. So they ground this stuff up and they use it. So I think you can even buy just like mushroom powder, and that is all derived from shiitake mushrooms. So what we're going to do is I'm soaking that in some boiling water, and that will probably take about 5 minutes or so, and those should be hydrated from there. I would also keep in mind, so you all, someone pointed this out yesterday too, maybe, that shiitake mushrooms, they normally take a lot longer than that to rehydrate. So you'll notice that my shiitake mushrooms, they are actually pretty thin. So these are like boutique shiitake mushrooms because I happen to live next door to a boutique mushroom shop. So you'll notice these are really, really thin, so they rehydrate really, really quickly, probably within like 5 minutes, no kidding. But with like more thicker shiitake mushrooms like I've used before, they can take like up to 20 or 30 minutes to rehydrate. So very, very often when I'm not using shiitake mushrooms like that, I have used or like even just like rehydrated that stuff before I even start the stream, because it will literally take 20 to 25 minutes to rehydrate that stuff. So. And if you have ever tried to eat a shiitake mushroom that's not fully hydrated, it is really the worst because it's still dry inside. So when it's dry inside, it's basically chewy and inedible. Yeah, totally. Yeah, MSG. So lots of people ask me about using MSG. I don't really have an opinion about MSG. I will say is that you can't really make Chinese food without MSG. It's a pretty essential ingredient. So when you see like Chinese restaurants and they're saying like, oh, we don't use MSG, or like our food is MSG free, that's probably a load of crap. It's not really possible to make Chinese food with MSG. But to that end, I actually don't use any independent sources of MSG. So like the MSG that you'll find, it's like you will frequently find it as like a crystallized form. So it kind of looks like salt, and you can sprinkle a little bit onto your like marinades and maybe even into your wok fries. And it adds like a little bit more umami and like that nice like last bit of kick that kind of brings together your Chinese wok fries. But what I have found is that I have never really found a need to use independent sources of MSG, and that's really because so many of the things that we're going to be using today already contain a whole bunch of MSG. So we could walk through all of the things that we're going to be using. So this is just plain soy sauce. It's in a weird bottle. But this is just plain soy sauce. Soy sauce definitely contains some amount of MSG, unless you buy soy sauce, organic soy sauce. This is black bean sauce. Black bean paste definitely has a whole bunch of MSG in it. I believe it is even on the ingredients list. Then we're going to be using, this is going to be some Hoisin Sauce. Hoisin Sauce has a small quantity of MSG in it too. And then, yeah, those are the big ingredients in our sauce. So since those ingredients, they contain so much MSG already, I have never really found a need to use MSG independently because you're already getting a lot of that from all of those sauces. But if for whatever reason you find that you need more of it, you can totally buy it independently. And then I would say like my favorite source of MSG actually comes from this, which is white pepper. So it even looks like MSG, but white pepper, it's assembled with MSG in it. And I love using this stuff in meat marinades, just like a tiny pinch, probably like a quarter teaspoon, no more than that. And it will give you a nice little bit of umami boost in your marinades. So I love using that stuff. White pepper, it's also the pepper that you commonly find with like on the table with the soy sauce, and that's because people like to use it in their soups, so they'll like add a little bit of white pepper on top of their soup. All of that, it all contains MSG. A GoFundMe, yeah, GoFundMe for a new microphone, totally. So we actually just finished raising a bunch of money for the stove camera behind us. That's over on YouTube, actually. So over on YouTube, so I think on Reddit there's a subscription goal. So we're working our way to 2,300 subscribers on YouTube right now. But over on YouTube, if there's actually not a subscription bar, there's a donation bar. So we've been raising money to replace the stove cam behind me. So I think you can probably see it. There's a GoPro that's hanging from the stove overhead. We just finished raising $200 to buy that camera, so that's probably fun. That would probably be maybe the next thing that I upgrade in order to like upgrade the quality of this series, is either the microphone or maybe this camera, because it's a little bit blurry. Is the audio getting choppy again? Let's see. Check, check, 1, 2, mic check, 1, 2, 1, 2, mic check. Yeah, I think it's just Such is life. Anyway, let's move on. Get into our sauce. So I'm going to assemble our sauce next. So I love assembling my sauces for my wok fries off heat. And that's usually because very often you will find lots of chefs will just dump this stuff straight into their wok fry. And that's because they make the same thing so often that they're not really measuring or tasting anymore, because they probably make the same thing 20, 30 times a day. I love doing this stuff off heat though beforehand so that we can stop and taste stuff. So what does it taste like? And then we can make adjustments if we need to. Super, super useful. So for our sauce, I'm starting off, that is 4 tablespoons of soy sauce plus 2 tablespoons of sesame oil. And then this is going to be 2 tablespoons of Shaoxing wine, which is a Chinese cooking wine. Shaoxing wine, it is very, very similar. I would say probably the same thing as dry cooking sherry. So if you can't get your hands on Shaoxing wine, you can just pick up some dry cooking sherry, and it is essentially the same thing. Next up is 2 tablespoons of Hoisin sauce. So Hoisin sauce is probably one of those sauces from Chinese cuisine that lots of people are very familiar with, because it is probably the one ingredient that comes up in a lot of Chinese American foods because it has so much sweetness in it. So since it has that high presence of sugar, you find it in a lot of Chinese food. So when I'm hacking like Panda Express recipes and stuff like that, I find myself using a whole lot of Hoisin sauce because Hoisin sauce contains so much sugar. When I use it in like more conventional uses, or like when I'm working on like more traditional Chinese dishes, I try and hold back on that Hoisin sauce as much as I can, because otherwise that sugar will become overpowering, and you'll have way too much sweetness in it. Yeah, cool. Next up, this is going to be 4 tablespoons of black bean sauce. You will notice that 4 tablespoons of black bean sauce is quite a bit, but I will also tell you that it is the main ingredient in a Zha Jiang Mian. If you can't find anything else that I used in this sauce, that will probably be fine. But if you can't find black bean sauce, this is probably the #1 thing that you need in order to make Zha Jiang Mian. If you don't have black bean sauce, you can't make this dish. Everything else, though, you can almost substitute. Oh, cool. Yeah, I am in the States. I actually live in California. Tim, that sounds cool. Send me a DM if you're serious, and I would definitely take one of your old microphone, because this microphone has been going for a while. Anyone who has watched these streams before can tell you that this microphone, it crashes probably like once a week at least. So, yeah, San Francisco, Oakland. I live in Oakland. Yeah, Tim, definitely shoot me a DM after the stream, and we'll hook up. That sounds great. Thank you so much. That's so awesome. Thank you. That is super dope. You're super kind. That's really very, very kind of you. All right. Oh yeah, rice vinegar. Next up is 2 tablespoons of rice vinegar. Rice vinegar, if you're keeping track, is where all of the brightness is going to come from. So all of that nice brightness and acidity from our Zha Jiang Mian is going to come from that rice vinegar. I very, very rarely will use more than a tablespoon or 2 of rice vinegar. Otherwise, it becomes overpowering. The only time that I have used more than a single 1 or 2 tablespoons at most of rice vinegar was actually on yesterday's stream when we did a hot and sour soup. And we used an entire 1/4 cup's worth of rice vinegar, which I believe is the equivalent of 5 tablespoons of rice vinegar, 5 or 6, something like that. I think it's 6 tablespoons, which is an absolutely crazy amount of rice vinegar, because it's in the name. It's sour, so that is where all of the sourness comes from in your hot and sour soup. All right. Last up is going to be some beef stock. I happen to have a beef stock boiling on the stove right now, so I'm just going to grab some from the stock pot. There's a little bit of particulate matter, but that's fine. Beef stock, I love making my stocks from scratch, so if you are getting tired of using stock from bouillon, start saving your veggie scraps and pick up some like your veggie and your bone scraps. Throw that stuff in the freezer, and then when you have a bag full of veggie scraps and bone scraps, make some stock. All you got to do is boil it, and I promise it is night and day. The one secret ingredient to pretty much everything that I cook is homemade stock. And that should do it. Right. The very last thing that we want to do anytime that we finish assembling a sauce is check out what it tastes like. So give it a taste. Does it need something? Add something. Mine needs a pinch of salt, so I'm going to add a tiny little bit of salt here. Yeah, that's doing it. So we're going to set this aside, and that should go in towards the end. The mic is crapping out again. I don't know what to do about this microphone. Alright. Excuse me while I reboot the microphone one more time. Check, check, 1, 2, mic check, 1, 2, 1, 2, mic check. Right. Check, check, 1, 2, mic check, 1, 2, 1, 2. This is better. Nope, it is even worse. Oh my goodness. Alright, check, check, 1, 2, mic check, 1, 2, 1, 2, mic check. Right, check, check, 1, 2, mic check, 1, 2, mic check. Alright, I will keep debugging this, but stupid microphone. Anyway, let's move on. Next up, I'm chopping up some bacon here, so if you're keeping track, this is probably the number 1 thing that does not belong in a Zha Jiang Mian, and that is because most traditionally in a traditional Zha Jiang Mian you use pork belly, or oftentimes you'll find just straight up pork fat. For me personally, I usually have bacon on hand more often than I have pork belly or pork fat, so I very often will use bacon as a substitute. When I use bacon, though, I always make sure that we want to be using thick-cut bacon, and that is because thick-cut bacon, it has a whole bunch more fat than thin-cut or regular-cut bacon. So we're not going to be using it in the same fashion that you would use bacon for like breakfast with your hash browns and stuff. What we're going to be doing, as you can see, is dicing this stuff up really, really fine, and then rendering the fat out. So we're going to render out a liquid form of bacon fat. And then we're going to use that in our cooking fat. So that is going to be where all of the pork fat is going to come from, is from here. So instead of using ground pork, we're going to be using ground turkey instead. And then we're going to be replacing that fat with some bacon fat. So if you're keeping track, though, this is probably the number 1 thing that does not belong in a Zha Jiang Mian is pork fat, bacon fat. So, all right. So over on the stove, I have a cast iron pan that is ice cold. So very, very infrequently you will see me using an ice cold cast iron pan. And that is because very often when we're wok cooking, we want everything to be ripping hot before we start throwing stuff into the pan. In this particular case, though, in order to render out all of this bacon fat, we want to be using a very cold pan so that we can bring up the pan's temperature with the bacon in it. So very, very uncommon to see me doing this in a wok fry, because usually in a wok fry we want as much heat as possible before we start cooking. So what I'm going to do in this cast iron pan, I'm going to set it to medium heat. And then probably over the course of maybe 5 minutes, we're going to start seeing that heat from our pan start coming up to temperature. So cast iron, because cast iron has a property about it in which it comes up to temperature very, very slowly. So it will probably take at least 5 minutes before it reaches cooking temperature, which is super, super important in this case because we want to be bringing that pan up to temperature very slowly in order to render out that fat. And then what we're going to do is we're going to remove that and put it back into the fry with our wok. The mic does not seem to be an issue on YouTube. Okay, cool. Well, if folks are watching on Reddit, and it is still crapping out over on Reddit, so I have 2 different mics. The one on YouTube seems to be working fine. So if it is still crapping out on Reddit, feel free to bop over on YouTube, and the mic seems to be working okay over there, according to Travis. So. STT Voyager, yeah, thank you. That's very kind of you. Meanwhile, while we wait for this bacon to render, we're going to chop up a couple more things here. So we're going to start off with chopping up our shiitake mushrooms. So you will notice, so I think it's been about 5, maybe 10 minutes at this point. And you will notice that our mushrooms have rendered into a nice tender mushroom. So earlier this one was very crispy and like very dry. Now it is a much more tender mushroom, so we can chop it into nice strips like so. Earlier I also mentioned that shiitake mushrooms, if they're very, very thick, they take a super long time to rehydrate. So in this particular case, because our shiitake mushrooms are super thin, they come into hydration very, very quickly, so it took only about 5 minutes in order for these to hydrate. So what we're going to do is dice these pretty fine, so we're going to dice these up, and then we're going to throw these into our wok fry towards the end. So we don't want these to be super large. What we're really going for is to have these blend in with the texture of our ground mince. Today we're going to be using ground turkey. So we don't want any very, very large pieces of mushroom. It doesn't have to be super fine. We don't need to pulverize this or anything, but we do want to make sure that we don't have any large pieces of mushroom floating around. Because we want these mushrooms to match the texture of our ground mince as best as possible. What is my favorite fish to work with? Ooh, good question. I love working with cod. I think it's really, really basic. But I think because it is so basic, I think it's a really good starting point. I also love using salmon anytime that I can. But I don't think salmon is super common in Chinese food. I also love crab. Anytime that I can get my hands on crab, I love using it. But it is super, super expensive. Fresh crab, even in California, it's super expensive. But if it's during like Dungeness crab season, I will absolutely go out of my way to cook with some crab. All right. Next up, we're going to do a quick marinade on our ground mince here. So this is some half a pound of ground turkey that we're starting out with. With a Zha Jiang Mian, I have done my Zha Jiang Mians with pretty much every kind of ground mince that I can think of. I'm going to turn this down for a sec. Today I'm using ground turkey, but I have also done it with ground pork. I've done it with ground beef. I think I've used ground lamb at one point. Really, any kind of ground mince that you can get your hands on, it will work just fine. The most traditional form of Zha Jiang Mian uses ground pork. In today's version, I'm actually using ground turkey, and I have actually tended towards using ground turkey more than ground pork. I actually do have ground pork in the freezer, but I opted to use ground turkey today because I think that it is a little bit more easy to work with. I think that the ground pork has a little bit more fat that renders out, and you have a lot more fat to contend with since we're also already using bacon fat. So if I didn't have bacon, I probably would have used that ground pork, but since today we are also adding some fat from that bacon, I'm going to leave that out. For our marinade, I'm going to keep it pretty simple here today. This is just going to be 4 tablespoons of soy sauce, plus a pinch of white pepper. The white pepper, as I mentioned earlier, is going to be the big highlight of our marinade here. White pepper, for those keeping track, is probably the biggest source of MSG in today's dish. Because white pepper is made with MSG in it very often. Unless if you go out of your way and buy white pepper without MSG, which I think that you can find. But then it's sort of like, what's the point of your white pepper? My recipe's proportion for one, or yeah, they're I'd say they're it kind of depends how hungry you are. Generally, they're proportioned for like 2.5 people. Or like 3 people who are not very hungry, 2 people who are really, really hungry, or more likely is probably like 2.5 people, or like 2 people plus some leftovers. So my leftovers, they usually go to my brother. He just had a baby, so he's eating all my leftovers. But some of them are proportioned for more than others. So if you're looking for all of the written recipes, they're over on my website. That's wucancook.com, and all of those written recipes, they have serving sizes on them. Usually, so for this one in particular, this will serve probably 3, or 2 if you're really, really hungry. I have definitely eaten all of this myself before too. So when I'm really hungry. Cool, and that is our ground turkey. Last up, I'm going to rehydrate some noodles pretty quickly. So these are going to be Shanghainese. Actually, these are not flat noodles. These are Shanghainese wide noodles. If you can't get your hands on wide noodles or any noodles like this, you can substitute them with pretty much any other kind of noodle that you can get your hand on. You can totally use dry fettuccine if you can't find Chinese noodles. Use whatever you can get and it will work just fine. What's most important is that we measure out this should be 8 ounces of noodles. I'm probably going to shoot for 8 ounces of noodles. Today I'm using, these are very fresh noodles, as you can tell. They are not dry at all. I think that these probably were rolled yesterday. I bought them at the market yesterday, which means that since they are so fresh, we want to be very careful with how that we cook them. So I would even say that you maybe don't even need to cook these. I think I'm probably not going to cook these at all. I was planning on rehydrating them or flash blanching them with some boiling water, but I actually don't think, because now that I just touched them, they are so fresh that they will probably overcook if I throw them in water. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to throw this straight into our wok right before we finish cooking, and then they will cook in the wok, I think. So I'm very, very concerned. Every time that I use fresh noodles like this, I am always very concerned about overcooking them, because if we did them in boiling water, they probably would be cooked within like 10 seconds. Probably like no more than 20 seconds, which means that there will be quite a bit of carry overcook happening in the wok too. So within that 20 seconds, that probably would overcook. If we blanched it for 20 seconds in water, it will probably end up overcooking in the wok fry. So instead, I'm just going to avoid that. We're just going to dump this straight into the wok when we're done. Yeah, cool. While that's going back over on the stove, our bacon is starting to render very nicely. I actually turned down the heat because I wasn't quite ready to use it. So I'm going to continue rendering. We're turning the heat back up here, and we're very slowly bringing our pan up to temperature, and that will render out all of our fat from a solid form into a liquid form. Hello to everyone just tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. If this is your first time catching one of these streams, we're here streaming every Tuesday and Thursday at 6:30 p.m. PST and Wednesdays at 6 p.m. PST. Today we're doing a Chinese noodle dish called Zha Jiang Mian. So Zha Jiang Mian is a noodle dish that you will find transcends across a whole bunch of different Asian cultures. I have definitely had both a Korean and a Japanese version of Zha Jiang Mian. The Korean version very often features seafood, so I've seen a lot of like squid and octopus in the Korean version, which is called Zha Jiang Mian. And the Japanese version is made with ramen, which is also super interesting. I had never come across that until I had a Japanese noodle, Zha Jiang Mian. So, since it is one of those dishes that transcends across so many cultures, it looks very different depending on who is cooking it. Even within the same culture, I've had Chinese Zha Jiang Mians look wildly different depending on who is cooking it. The version that I'm cooking today is based off of my dad's Zha Jiang Mian, what he used to use, what he used to make for us when we were kids. My dad used to throw lima beans in it. I actually really dislike the lima beans though, so I'm actually leaving out those lima beans. But everything else that we're doing is very loosely based off of the way that my dad was making it. So the use of bacon and the use of diced shiitake mushrooms, both of those come from the way that my dad used to make this stuff. If you're looking for how to cook this yourself, pretty much everything that I cook on stream, it has a recipe video that goes along with it, including this dish. So if you're looking for how to cook this yourself, I recommend hopping over to the YouTube channel and checking out some of the recipes that are popping up over there. Those recipes, they come out every Friday, so every Friday there's a brand new recipe. This one came out a couple of Fridays ago, I want to say like last month. In those recipe videos, they generally move a little bit slower. We take a little bit more time to kind of like talk through all of the decision making that goes behind some of the things that I'm cooking, and like why I do certain things in dishes, why I leave some of those things out, a lot of like the reasoning behind a lot of the things that I do in a recipe. So those are always super interesting to do because we can like kind of talk through some of the decision making behind what I do when I write a recipe. So. In addition to all of those recipes, that's also where the schedule of my live streams live. So if you're trying to find everything that I'm going to be cooking within the next 2 or 3 weeks, that all lives over on YouTube. So if you were watching over on YouTube, you would have known a couple weeks ago that I'd be cooking this. That would be the laptop behind us. I know that several people are also already watching over on YouTube. Lots of folks have also started picking up tuning in and taking a look at the things that they want to cook with me. So you can take a look, check out what's cooking in the next couple of weeks, and then pick up the ingredients that you need in order to cook along with me. So always super fun to cook with other people if you want to join us. We have a couple of different series that live over on the YouTube channel. There's a whole series that's dedicated to reproducing foods from Chinese American cuisine. That's probably my favorite one because it's super interesting to take apart Chinese American cooking. So I spent a whole bunch of time like hacking Panda Express recipes, things like honey sesame chicken, kung pao chicken, General Tso's chicken. I just finished up a video for a Mongolian beef from P.F. Chang's, which is always super interesting. Because Chinese American food, it's not really Chinese anymore. It's basically just American food. Like General Tso's chicken is not Chinese, it's basically just American. So when you take that apart, and then what I usually like to do is remove some of those American qualities and then reconstruct some of that stuff as if it were traditional Chinese cooking, and sort of like apply some of the qualities of traditional Chinese cooking in the way like you would if you were making a dish that was traditionally Chinese, which is really interesting with things like kung pao chicken or like honey sesame chicken, for example, because honey sesame chicken is really just like American popcorn chicken with a honey glaze. So it's very interesting if we were to remove all of those American qualities and reassemble it as if it were traditional Chinese food. What does that look like? So that's what that series is dedicated to. So if you're interested in stuff like that, I recommend hopping over to the YouTube channel, checking out what's going on over there. We have a what's coming up? This Friday is coming up is going to be a Chinese marble tea egg, which is a cha ye dan, which is essentially like a dark brown egg that has like a marble. I don't know how to explain this. It's a tea egg, so a Chinese tea egg. So it's soaked in black tea with a bunch of soy sauce, and it is very tasty for breakfast. So that's coming up this Friday. So if you're interested in stuff like that, I recommend hopping over to YouTube, check out what's going on over there. Lots of fun content popping up. All right, so over on the stove, our bacon is rendering out very nicely. I think this is just about done. And I'm going to start pulling out the solids of our bacon here first. So we're going to take out the solid, our bacon solids first, and then we're going to set these aside and throw them into our wok fry towards the end. And then we're going to pull out our bacon fat, and we're going to use that in our cooking oil today. You'll notice that I'm not using a wok today, and that is very specifically because it is really hard to render bacon in a wok. I have figured out ways to do it, but I have discovered that it has started getting in the way of doing a nice long yao in my wok because we have rendered bacon fat in the wok already. So I kind of have tended away from doing that. That's a nice bit of bacon fat in my face. What I like doing is starting it off in a cast iron pan. Now we have this nice bit of rendered bacon fat going on in our pan here. And then what I'm going to do is take out my wok. And then I'm going to pour out this fat. And then we're going to set that bacon fat aside, and we're going to finish. We're going to use it in our cooking oil when we're ready to start cooking on our wok. Camera's way off. There we go. So I'm just taking out my wok now, and we're preheating it up until about as hot as a wok can get. And then when we're ready to go, we're going to throw that bacon fat in. Yeah. Where's the MSG? Yeah, so the MSG is in a number of places. Probably, yeah, as Jay-Bird just mentioned, probably the biggest source of MSG today is in the white pepper that we did with our ground turkey marinade. But MSG, it's also present in a whole bunch of other things that we also already added. So it is definitely present in regular soy sauce. It is also present in the oyster sauce that we used, and definitely present in the black bean sauce, which we used a lot of. There's 4 tablespoons of black bean sauce in this already, which means that there is a whole bunch of MSG coming from there. So I'm not actually adding any independent uses, any independent MSG, because I don't think that we're going to need it. But if you find that you need it, totally feel free to use it. I have no qualms with using MSG. Do I cook spivvy or hot foods, and how do I keep the flavor? A lot of people focus on hot and no flavor. Oh yeah, totally. Tim, good question. Also, Tim, feel free to just keep asking. If I miss a question, feel free to just repeat yourself, because very often if I'm not facing the screen, I'll miss questions all the time. This chat, it scrolls really fast. It only goes up to like three questions. So, but yeah, hot foods. That is probably like one of my biggest gripes with Chinese, like American Chinese food, or like even like restaurants that claim to be like traditional Chinese food in America that are not very good Chinese restaurants. Is that like a lot of those restaurants, they love to like amp up like the spice of Chinese food, especially Szechuan foods, which, to be fair, Szechuan foods are like already very spicy, but it is not by any means the only quality of Szechuan food. So today we're actually not using that much Szechuan peppercorn today. But very, very often you will see a lot of restaurants that use like just heat. So like a whole bunch of Tianjin peppers, like a whole bunch of doubanjiang, and then just like a whole bunch of Szechuan peppercorn or whatever it is that's just like assaulted with heat. Which to me, in my personal opinion, I don't think that that's what Chinese food is. Not even Szechuan food. I don't think that traditional Szechuan food is supposed to be that hot. I think that it is certainly supposed to be quite hot, but not that hot. And very, very often, I totally agree, is that super often that excessive amount of heat, it gets in the way of all of the other things that we're looking for here. So like mainly like qualities of umami, a lot of like the savory qualities that we're getting from the pork. All of those things you can definitely, it muddles up quite a bit if you use too much heat. So. Yeah, exactly. Well, that's a ZTTP. Yeah, that's exactly it. It's like levels of flavor. So it's not just heat. It's like heat plus umami plus savory plus salty. Sometimes there's sweetness involved. All of those things, they work together. So in a lot of restaurants that I've been to in America, like Chinese restaurants in America, I see things that are just heat. And to me, it's just kind of gross, because it's basically just heat. Yeah, KY, totally. KY is a good spot. All right, so you can tell my wok is heating very nicely. There is a whole bunch of smoke billowing off of my wok here, and that is a good sign. That means that your wok is nice and hot. If you don't see that heat billowing off, that means that your wok is not hot enough yet. So make sure, before you start cooking in a wok, you make sure that you want to be seeing heat like this. If you don't see heat billowing off of your wok, it means that you don't have enough heat. And it is very, very important to have a lot of heat in your wok before you start cooking, because otherwise you're going to end up with a mushy stir fry. So as soon as we have a lot of heat going on here, we're going to start off with, I almost forgot my bacon fat. I'm going to start off by adding my oils here next. So I'm starting off with my bacon fat. Followed by, I'm going to add a little bit of cooking oil here. So this is peanut oil that we're using today. If you don't have peanut oil, you can totally just use vegetable oil and it will be just fine. I'm bolstering this with a little bit of cooking oil here because I don't think we have quite enough bacon fat to make it through this cook here. And then this in Chinese cooking is what we call a long yao. A long yao is essentially heating a wok up very, very hot and then adding cold cooking oil to your wok to get a nice non-stick surface. If you were to add hot or cold oil to a cold wok and then reheat it, you would have a very, very sticky surface. All right, next I'm adding my, what are we doing first? Not that. I'm starting off with my garlic and ginger first. Almost added the wrong thing. So that is my ginger, followed by my garlic. And you will notice that now that things are in the wok, the rest of this stream is probably going to happen really fast. So probably within the next 5 minutes we'll be done cooking. So we're blooming out our garlic and ginger just long enough until it becomes fragrant. So use your nose at this point. When you start smelling garlic and ginger, that's when you know you're ready to move on. And next up, I'm adding my ground meat here. So you'll notice that I'm adding it a little bit at a time. We want to be careful not to add all of this at once because we want to try and break up this ground meat as best we can before it ends up in the wok. And then we're giving our ground mince a little bit of time, maybe about a minute worth of time to kind of get a little bit of a cook going. We don't need the ground mince to be fully cooked before we start adding other things, but we do want the bulk of our cook to be done while the wok is relatively empty. So before we start adding our noodles, we need our ground mince to be relatively cooked because that is how we're going to develop a nice crispy wok fry. So if you start cooking stuff while the wok is full, that is how you end up with a pretty mushy stir fry. Is that when a wok heats or fills up too much and you have too many things in the wok, then the temperature of the wok starts rapidly dropping. And then as you have lower temperatures in the wok, that's how you end up with a mushy stir fry. So if you've ever had a stir fry that's kind of like porridgey or has like the consistency of like oatmeal or like old cereal, that comes from stir fries that are done on low heat. And is very unattractive. That is the quality that you want to avoid getting anytime that you can. All right, I'm adding my bacon to the wok next. Followed by, almost forgot the mushrooms. Followed by my mushrooms. And finally, my noodles and our sauce. So you'll remember that our noodles are completely raw, so we didn't do any cook time. So that means that all of the cook is going to happen right now. Alright, so you can probably hear it, but as soon as I added that sauce and our noodles to the wok's temperature suddenly dropped. So you can listen. there's not a lot of sizzling happening in the wok anymore. So that's a sign that you don't have heat in the wok anymore. So if you're still cooking and you notice that happen, that's a bad sign. That means that you're on your way to a porridgey stir fry. In our case right now, we're done cooking, so there's nothing else that needs to cook here. All we're really waiting for is for our noodles to sort of come together, and we're sort of just trying to tie our wok fry together with a little bit more cohesiveness, and that's it. But if you're still cooking and you notice that happen, that's a really bad sign. That's probably the #1 thing that we need to avoid when we're wok cooking is the loss of heat retention. So I'm actually even going to kill heat here. Let's just turn the heat down. I'm turning down my heat, and then real quick before I forget, I'm going to assemble a cornstarch slurry. I meant to do this earlier, but I forgot. A cornstarch slurry is probably one of the ingredients that you see come across a lot of different Chinese foods, and that is because it is where all of the thickness of a sauce comes from. So it reminds me a lot of how you use pasta sauce in Italian cooking, which is essentially adding starch to a sauce. So it is how we thicken up sauces. What was before the bacon? I think before the bacon was the ground meat. I think that's all that was in the pan before ground meat. So it was just ground meat. So it was the ground turkey and garlic and ginger. All right. Yeah, that ought to do it, I think. The last thing that I'm going to do is add our cornstarch slurry. And this is going to be where all of the thickness of our sauce is going to come from. So you'll notice that as soon as I add that cornstarch, our sauce is suddenly going to thicken up, and then we're going to have a nice cohesive sauce from there. So if you're familiar with like Italian pasta cooking, it reminds me a lot of how you use pasta water in things like carbonaras and bologneses, in which we use some of the starch that comes off of the pasta, and we use it to thicken up the sauces in things like carbonaras and bolognese, stuff like that. Oh, so many people. Okay, yeah, there's a lot of comments. I'm definitely losing track. Sherry Lane, yeah. Hello to everyone on YouTube. Yeah, thank you for bopping over. I'm glad that you found us on Reddit. Now you're on YouTube. That's cool. Hello to everyone just tuning in. Well, I'll say it one more time before we finish up. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time tuning in, we're streaming every Tuesday and Thursday at 6:30 p.m. PST, Wednesdays at 6 p.m. PST. With new recipes, they're coming out every Friday. So if you're watching on YouTube, you're on the channel already. If you're watching on Reddit, that would be the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen. That YouTube channel, it is where all of the recipe videos live. So everything that we're cooking on live stream, it's coming from a recipe video. Generally, when I'm cooking something on stream, I'm probably cooking my way through a recipe that I've already released. This particular Zha Jiang Mian, it came out a couple of months ago and was part of a larger series that we've been doing across a bunch of foods. I think this one was from the Bay Area restaurant hack series that I did, hacking the Shandong Zha Jiang Mian. I think that's where it came from. There's a couple of different series that live over on the YouTube channel. There's a whole series that's dedicated to reproducing foods from the San Francisco Bay Area restaurant scene. There's another series that lots of people have been really stoked about, is the Chinese American Food Hacks series, in which I've been deconstructing a lot of foods from places like Panda Express, PF Chang's, things like that, places that are really, really iconically Chinese American. Definitely not traditionally Chinese, but like very Americanized Chinese. And kind of like taking a look at some of those dishes and like what make them tick. What are the things that happen to Chinese food that make them American? So when Chinese food came to America, what were the qualities that make them American? And that what I like to do in those dishes is like I'll probably take one shot in which I try and recreate the original version. A lot of times I find myself using a lot of things like sugar or like honey and like a lot of sauce elements to make it very sauce heavy and very sugar heavy, because as far as I can tell, that's like two of the big qualities that make Chinese American food tick is all about sugar. And then very often what I'll do is I'll do a second version that kind of removes a lot of those American qualities and recreate them without all of those American qualities. So what I like to do a lot of times when I remove sugar out of a recipe is replace them with other things that come from traditional Chinese cooking. Ingredients that are really, really common to traditional Chinese food, but not super commonly found in Chinese American food. So things like black vinegar, dark soy sauce, stuff like that, all really, really common in traditional Chinese cooking, but not super common not super commonly found in Chinese American foods. And that series is always super fun because a lot of those things are not really Chinese anymore. There's not really a lot of Chinese qualities about like General Tso's chicken anymore. It's all really just American food. So if you're interested in stuff like that, I recommend hopping over to the YouTube channel and checking out what's going on over there. There's lots of fun content popping up right now. I believe last Friday we did a hot and sour soup, so the last thing that came out was a hot and sour soup, which was super fun. Next Friday, so 2 days from now, will be marble tea eggs, cha ye dan, which is going to be super fun. Because that's a dish that I've been eating for breakfast since I was a little kid. Lots of stuff like that. So if you're interested in recipes and stuff like that, I recommend hopping over to the YouTube channel and checking out some of that stuff. Lots of fun things coming up soon. I just finished a Mongolian beef recipe that's coming up very soon, which is super interesting because Mongolian beef, I bet like lots of folks don't know this, but Mongolian beef is cooked very differently from the way that other stir fries are done, in that it is a steak, it's a flank steak that is seared first, which is very uncommon. I have never seen a wok used for a sear before, so that's super interesting. And it's seared in a very specific way with the use of the cornstarch coating. You're going to binge all of the videos right now. Yeah, that's awesome. I highly recommend binging those videos. They are very binge-worthy. About what to buy or make for the... Yeah. I don't have any videos for that. Maybe I'll do one. That sounds like a good idea. Because those are like very commonly asked questions. You found it? Yeah, you found me on Reddit. That's awesome. Yeah. Hello to everyone who's finding me over on YouTube right now. Chinese Australian. Ooh, that's really cool. I don't know anything about Chinese food in Australia. I literally know zero thing. I know that there is a large population of Asians in Australia, but that's it. I don't know anything else about it. I did recently have Chinese food in Scotland, which I thought was very interesting. Like what Scottish people think Chinese food is. Super interesting. But anyway, if you're interested in stuff like that, I recommend hopping over to the YouTube channel and checking some of that stuff out. There's super fun content popping up over there. They're really fun to make. I love like taking a look at a lot of those dishes because a lot of the stuff that we're doing are things that I have honestly, like a lot of them are things that I've never eaten before, like honey sesame chicken. I probably have never had honey sesame chicken before I wrote the recipe for honey sesame chicken. But after I hacked it, I cook that recipe all the time now because it's like easily one of the most delicious things that I have ever made is honey sesame chicken. It's also super interesting though because a lot of the things that I'm doing in a honey sesame chicken, for example, are things that I would normally do in a regular old Chinese wok stir fry, but I'm applying it to things that are basically American food. So. Last up, I'm reheating my wok. So I cleaned out my wok. I just gave it a quick rinse. And we do the same. This is just the same that you do with a cast iron pan. I'm reheating it, giving it a little bit more oil, and then giving it a quick wipe down. And this is just going to prevent the carbon steel in our wok from carbonizing and rusting, so we don't want to do that to happen. So that also means that it's not just about coating your cooking surface, it also means that you have to do the same for the bottom of your pan or wok too. We'll do this later. Super important, while your wok is still hot, make sure that you clean it while it's hot. If you let it cool down and then clean it, you're going to have a real bad time. Stuff is going to stick to that like everywhere. So make sure before you sit down and eat, clean your wok first. Very important. Yeah, definitely share with folks in the Bay Area. I'm working on working on a delivery service so I can start serving food to people in the Bay Area. Hopefully that pans out. I'm working with an app called Chef right now. And hopefully if it works out, we should be able to deliver some food to folks in the Bay Area, which will be really interesting. I've never done that before. So. Alright, so you'll notice our noodles are fully cooked. We didn't do anything to cook them, we literally just put them in the wok, and that is all it takes to cook fresh noodles. If you're not using fresh noodles, if you're using something like a dehydrated noodle, you probably want to blanch that in boiling water first, otherwise it won't be cooked. But in today's case, these noodles, they're very fresh. I literally bought them at the noodle shop yesterday, so. Carrots, yeah. So we're finishing these with our carrots as a garnish. Yeah, Delaware smash, that's exactly what I was just getting to. We're finishing this with our carrots. These are our final garnish, super, super important. These were on the other side of the kitchen, which means that they are nowhere in the same vicinity as our raw meats, and is by far the most important thing to pay attention to when you're looking at cross-contamination. And that should do it. Cool. Yeah, Travis, oh, that's too bad. No chance to find it in Texas. That's too bad. I think that you can probably find a lot of these things on the internet. I have never tried to buy food on the internet, but I have been told that a lot of these ingredients you can find on Amazon and order it delivery. From what I've been told, I've heard that it works out just fine. Cool. Yeah, you just moved to a new kitchen, a new apartment with a new kitchen. New kitchens are always tricky because you don't know where anything is. So like that's like my biggest problem when I cook in like friends' kitchens, is that you don't know where anything is. So like it kind of throws off your workflow because you don't know where anything is. Do I cook with rice vine or mirin? Yeah, I love using mirin all the time. Mirin, I would say, is probably most closely related. Whoa, what's happening to this camera? There we go. Mirin, I would say, is probably most closely related to something a little bit sweeter. So if I was going to say, I would say mirin in Chinese cooking probably is most closely related to Shaoxing wine, which has a little bit more sugar and sweetness to it. Mirin is essentially a rice wine. So I would say it meets somewhere in between like rice vinegar and Shaoxing wine. Ooh yeah, that sounds really good. Tim, if you're making lemon chicken or barbecue beef, I would say go with miso, a light miso though, like a really light miso for lemon chicken, because it will add like a real nice little bit of umami, like no more than like a tablespoon or two, and as long as it's light, it won't add any weird coloring. So don't use a dark miso on a lemon chicken because it will turn everything really dark brown. But if you use a light miso, it will just give it a nice like a nice little bit of color, and it will pair really nicely with the acidity from the lemon. Yeah, Travis, I heard Texas is going through some stuff right now. Yeah, stay safe, man. Cool. All right, I think I caught everyone. I don't know if I missed any questions. If I missed anything, feel free to send me a DM, or feel free to repeat yourself too. I'll be around cleaning up dishes and stuff. If I missed anything, feel free and repeat yourself. I know I miss questions all the time, so if I miss something, go ahead and repeat yourself. If you haven't yet, definitely hop over to the YouTube channel. There's lots of fun stuff going on over there, including a whole bunch of people are popping over in that chat right now, which is super cool. Always super fun to see so many people finding me on YouTube right now. In addition to the concurrent live stream that would be the laptop behind me, there's also a whole schedule of everything that I'm going to be cooking on live stream that lives over there. So if you're interested in finding out what I'm going to be cooking next, you can find all of that stuff over on YouTube. So if you were watching on YouTube, you would have known a couple of weeks ago that I would be doing this particular dish. Yeah, Stonehex. So the YouTube channel is the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen, which is youtube.com/woocancook. Lots of fun content over there. So it's youtube.com/woocancook. I just realized I didn't say that out loud. That's the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen too, so lots of fun stuff over there. Everything that I cook on a live stream, it has a recipe video that goes along with it, so if you're trying to find something to cook and you want to reproduce the things that I'm cooking yourself, I definitely recommend hopping over there because those recipe videos, they tend to move a little bit slower, they're easier to follow. They're a little bit easier to follow like when you're trying to bookmark it, so it's easier to bookmark and kind of take a look at, like looking backward at like what to do when you're trying to reproduce this particular Zha Jiang Mian. That all lives over on the YouTube channel. Can I make pancakes in a wok? Ooh. Usually when I make pancakes, what I assume you're talking about are Chinese pancakes, so like green onion pancakes or kimchi pancakes. Usually I use my cast iron pan for that because it's really useful to have a flat surface for that stuff. In order to flatten it out. And my wok is not flat. If you have a flat bottom wok, you could totally do that in a flat bottom wok. But my wok happens to be round bottomed, so it's not really great for trying to like cook flat stuff. Yeah, Tim, I'll definitely send you a direct message about the mic. Thank you so much. That's really awesome. I think this original the mic pack that I'm using on Reddit is I think I got it for free from a buddy of mine. And I think it's like from San Francisco City Hall from like the 80s. So it's a piece of crap. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I'm so excited. I'm so excited that people are learning. That's really cool. I've never like been an educator before. This is cool. So super fun. It's also really fun to like share my food culture and like kind of share like all of the things that I grew up eating and like how those things like played a role in like shaping my childhood. Almost everything that I cook are probably things that come from very, very like iconic parts of my childhood. So this particular Zha Jiang Mian I used to eat all the time when I was a kid. My dad used to make it. The only difference is that version had lima beans in it, and I freaking hate lima beans. So. Anyway. Thanks everyone for tuning in. If you haven't yet, hop over to the YouTube channel, check out what's going on over there. There's a lot of folks that are popping up over there already. I know lots of people are also watching over on YouTube. I know that a lot of people have also started bookmarking the live streams, and the YouTube channel also has the ingredients list for everything that I'm cooking. So if you want, you can bookmark that ingredient list and pick up the things that you need and cook with me, which is always super fun. It's always more fun to cook with other people because then we can talk about all of the mistakes that we made. I know I made at least one mistake today, if you could point it out. Stonehex, you subbed. Cool, yeah. There used to be a ham charo that would pop up when people subbed. I can't seem to fix ham charo anymore, but ham charo is the hungry ramen eater, hamster eating ramen. But he doesn't, I don't know what happened to ham charo. Anyway, all right, thanks everyone for tuning in. I'll see you. We'll be back tomorrow at 6:30. I believe we are doing. What are we doing? I think we're doing pad thai. I want to say we're doing pad thai. I might be wrong about that. I think we're doing pad thai, or is it kung pao chicken? I can't remember. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye everyone. Is it live right now? Yeah, it is. It is live right now. Definitely hop over to YouTube. All right. Thanks, guys. See you soon.
Am I coming out of left field? Ooh, I'm a rebel.